Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to introduce Kristine Sunda to you today to follow up on all the work we've been doing together. She's with K. Shannon Associates. Kristine is a professional Agile educator and consultant. She comes highly recommended by an ARL library director who also teaches Agile workshops. And the reason he recommended her so highly was that he said Kristine is the person he consults when he is stumped and needs some advice. So very excited to hear what Kristine has to share with us today. And with that, I'm turning it over to you, Kristine.
Thank you, Maureen.
If you'll just bring up your slides, you're good to go.
Okay, can everybody see my slides now?
Perfect.
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you so much for the introduction, Jill and Maureen, and thank you all for the opportunity to engage with you through this series. I've been in conversation with Maureen to learn about what you've spoken with and what you've seen so far. So I'm excited to be a part of the journey that you're taking. So I'm gonna, there we go. All right, so first, my introduction to you of myself. Again, my name is Kristine Sunda. I have been in project management. I've been higher ed since the mid-90s in IT department. I started out in IT department in enterprise applications, but learned a lot of very, very structured project management early on in my career and became a PM very quickly. And attained a PMP certification in 2004. So I've got a very strong traditional background of, to the point of sitting with people doing a pen and ink sign off on requirements, line by line by line, and it learned an ingrained methodology. In 2007, I learned Agile and Scrum, and from that point on, I have thirsted for more and more knowledge and more implementation and sharing of information. So I've enjoyed the Agile team model a whole lot. I appreciate it and the benefits of it, and hopefully some of that excitement will be sparked with you through today's session as well. So I'm a self-declared Agile enthusiast. There's a lot of folks that join me in that, but it's a real exciting way that once you really understand, believe it, a great way to be working. I've worked both in jobs in higher ed, and I've also worked independently as a trainer for Agile, and that's how I got involved, especially in the library groups. I worked with the Koali open source library group when they were first getting started, and helped them to get organized in the development effort for that. And then I've also worked with other libraries at institutions all over the place. And I have found that librarians and libraries have open-mindedness that the central IT on campuses isn't quite as adaptable to. So it's exciting. It's oftentimes an easier implementation for Agile because of the ability to be flexible and open-minded that I've seen in libraries. I've held roles, permanent roles at Wake Forest, and I actually am in a permanent role now at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in academic affairs, and I'm an Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs for Technology, and I've been here for about 2 years. I'm doing a lot of work. I worked in the University of South Carolina contracting for an implementation, enterprise application implementation, but I also worked to transition their IT department to Agile. came into a challenged implementation and applied Scrum and Agile and built out a team and did a large-scale revamp for a 1.5 year, 18-month rollout, and multiple sprinting teams, multiple Scrum teams, and we hit every milestone and every accomplishment for that implementation. So lots of lessons learned there, lots of practical experience. So in addition to coaching and training, I've also been in every role possible on an Agile team. So I look forward to, or I'm open to any questions that you have as well. And I've actually, I think, worked with some of your schools and presented with some of your schools. So you may see these are some of the schools that I've worked with. I've co-presented with the librarian groups at Penn, and I've trained there, and the University of Illinois, and what was Lehigh, but has moved along. University of Notre Dame, I co-presented with them at EDUCAUSE a few years ago as well. So lots of folks are treading around Agile and Scrum and balancing it out. So it's getting exciting. So I'm going to cover today what Agile is, from my perspective, Agile principles and Scrum basics. So there's a lot of talk about Agile and what it is and isn't, and my philosophy, I'll start with that aspect. My philosophy is a little less canned and methodical and a little bit more organic and I wouldn't go so far to say spiritual, but I do believe that it's really a way of thinking, a way of not really a way of actually defining something or doing something in a certain way, but there are frameworks like Scrum and Lean and Kanban and some of those things. Those are frameworks within Agile, but Agile itself is really just thinking in a different way, thinking less sequentially and thinking more organically and thinking more creatively in a way. It's a different creativity way. So that's the philosophy that I'm going to speak to, or that's the context that I'm going to speak to you today, and it's from my experience. And like I said, I've worked in organizations and I've coached organizations, and each one has their own. Each higher ed organization is different, and we're very different from corporate world. So you can get a lot of different trainings, a lot of different information, but the corporate world is a lot more specific to what they're trying to accomplish within a product line or within a development effort specific to profit. The beauty of higher ed is that we're more of a mission than we are, a company looking to profit. So that's an interesting, exciting way that Agile fits that, is looking at, but also challenging, looking at how we accomplish the mission of higher education and the mission of why we're here in the best way and most productive and energizing way. So there are even some universities that have spread Agile very broadly across their campuses. And I think that's because they've embraced the spirit of it and understand that it's, the connection to higher ed is really exciting, and the alignment to that. So like I said, it's Agile overall is a mindset. The 3 T's of Agile that I think are really fundamental roots and easy to remember is it's team-oriented, teamwork-oriented. So one of my first, when I first started implementing, way back when, somebody on the team said to me, now I can finally take a vacation and not have to worry about something being called upon for something that I did because I'm the only person that knows it. It's really making it more institutionalized, more mature, more, the team aspect creates that broader understanding and broader base, and that, like I said, it's a difference in a way of thinking. So traditional higher education, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, in some institutions even still, is very siloed from between departments and very siloed between people, where and some of that, some of that happens from low budgets or budget challenges, or the recession, I think, hit a lot of folks and had a lot of cuts. And so oftentimes, because the budgets are lower, we ask people to do a lot more, and they wear a lot of hats, and they're the only person that wear those hats, and it just kind of happens that way. And Agile is like changing that mold and making it not letting that happen that way. So embracing and believing that it doesn't have to be just that person doing just that thing, that we as a team can solve problems, and we as a team can do anything. And the more that you take on that, the more you get, more out of Agile, the more you embrace the team aspect and believe anything and everything can be done through an Agile and through a team. The second T is transparency, and that is also a scary concept sometimes. So that means everything's out there, the good and the bad. The bad news is not like a fine wine; it does not get better over time. So it's really believing that the more open we can say everything is and where we are and exactly what's going on, that's really the goal, is to make sure there's no black box, there's no toss over the wall, somebody works on something for a few months and then it comes back at you. It's understanding exactly where and seeing exactly where everything is all the time, both from the process standpoint and from the product standpoint. So everything is wide open, transparent. To attain that transparency and the teamwork side, you really need trust. So you have to have trust within the team to really build a team. And that's really fundamental and important. And you will storm and norm and go through all that. But you also have to have trust from leadership. You have to have trust from stakeholders. You have to have trust from management. You have to trust across the board. And that, I think, it works hand in hand, where when you start delivering through Agile, you gain and earn trust. The transparency creates trust. So it's a little bit of give and take between these things, but trust is really, really important. And that's really there is a lot less definition in Agile. And so if the organization as a whole has to have an appetite for less definition and being okay with the gray, that it's not black and white. And on the flip side, and this is a little more probably age-old thinking, hopefully, I'm not sure how, I suppose it's still out there. The naysayer perspective is that it's completely undisciplined. It's not that. There should be guardrails. Everything, that's number one. You can't be successful with Agile if you don't set the guardrails first. It's very, very disciplined, very, very high focus on quality. It's not an excuse to drop documentation. It's instead of no documentation, it's not heavy documentation, it's just enough, just in time kind of philosophy, which is similar to what you'd see in Lean, but just enough documentation that it stays accurate and useful, but not so much that it's heavy, all I'm doing is documenting, but also not to the point that I don't have anything. And it's certainly not the wild, wild west. No cowboys, no Agile cowboys allowed. Everybody's accountable for the work they're doing, and the team holds everybody accountable. So it's really a higher level of accountability. So one way to describe the two, this is a comparison. I think you've covered a lot of the predictive project models and also some comparisons to the Agile or adaptive projects. But this is kind of to give you a frame of mind or a thought or comparison is in our traditional or predictive project management, we always assumed that we knew everything, we knew how we could estimate everything for starters, which we really never could. And estimates are only, you try really hard to get estimates, but that you're guessing. I don't care what argument you have, you're still always guessing. You can use past feedback and you can use ways to improve your estimates, but it's still just a guess, especially when it comes to something more creative, like software. So projects that are more predictive are and the PMI, as they embraced Agile, kind of separates and discerns it this way, that the predictive projects are more like capital building projects, where you know how much something costs, you know how much labor costs, you know how long something's going to take mostly. There's some variance, and you get in the weather and things like that when you're building a house or building a building or something. But it's still, there's 4 walls, and the walls are going to be built with, brick or plywood or whatever it is. You've got a pretty well known, this is what's going to happen. And when you're creating something like software or doing it some sort of more organic, creative process or product or project, you can't estimate it because you're learning as you go. So that's really the difference. So traditionally we assume we know everything. We tell management we know everything. We know exactly how we're going to do it, and then we assume that we'll never change. And that really, when you try and do those big implementations or big projects where you've got like a year, 18 months, or even 6 months or 3 months, we learn a lot. So it's hard, how do I know what I'm going to do in 3 months or 6 months from now, let alone every task or everything. So traditional project management built out every single task and assumed it was right. Agile is more like and that's like a cannonball. Like I'm going to shoot off that cannonball, and I know it's going to land. It's going to land where I say it's going to land. Agile is more like a guided missile. So we take off. We know we're going after a goal, but that goal might shift a little bit. That goal might look differently than I think it is today. I'm going to learn. The team's going to learn along the way, and we're going to refine and decide what trajectory we want to take as we learn each step of the way, each iteration, each retrospect. Every time I look back, I'm going to make some sort of adjustment because I know more than I did 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or a month ago or whatever it is. And I'm going to embrace change. I want to change. I want to actually deliver something that is useful to the customer, not what I contractually said. And we're always focused on that highest value. What's most important? What's the most important feature? What's the most important thing to be talking about? What's the most important thing for the day? Everything's always the highest value. And not your plan may change based on that. And always continuously improving. So that guided missile may end up somewhere different than it originally set out to, but in the Agile mindset, it's somewhere better. It's delivering something better. This is an example of the predictive or waterfall model. This was, I think you got a lot of that history earlier on. The difference or comparison here is Agile is incremental, so it's taking that whole methodology, incrementally building, and it's also iterative. So it's taking also the whole methodology and blending it all together and iterating. So we're building things iteratively and incrementally. So we essentially, we're adding on the increments or pieces of something And we're doing that in a way that those pieces are workable pieces in each iteration. So we take what would be these pieces and we put them together to build working parts. So we have, for instance, release 1 is a triangle, right? Release 2 is also a triangle, but it built, so that incremental piece is built on. So I've got a better, bigger triangle. And release 3, another, I still got a triangle, but it's a better, bigger triangle. So I've got a usable triangle every iteration, every release, but it's better and improved each time. Here's the other, another example of incrementally growing and changing. So something, something's beautiful each step of the way, but it's different and growing and better and exciting. So that's really the difference, and that's really the smaller pieces, breaking things into the smaller pieces and understanding how to make those smaller pieces come together. And it can be product, it can be working software, it can be anything, or it can be a working stage. In my experience, in my implementations of Agile, it can also be like a working stage of something that's the bigger overall picture, because it's bigger. Agile and Scrum, all of it's bigger than software. I'm going to pause there just for a moment. If there are any questions at all before I move on to teams, and take a drink of water.
Hi, Kristine. I'm not sure if you cover this later, but this is Maureen. I'm wondering, you mentioned something about needing the buy-in of your management to implement Agile. And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or recommendations or experiences on how you go about that.
Well, thank you, Maureen. That's a great segue into this slide. I think that it's the buy-in, it depends on the culture of the organization. So there's a couple of different ways, and really organizing is your first step. Like identifying the team that you want, who and how you want the team to be, what are you trying to achieve, and how do you organize that? And is it one team or multiple teams or one area or multiple areas? And kind of picking the scope of what you think is doable. And then having depending on what level of information the leadership wants from the work that you're doing, will kind of drive which way and how deep and how broad you can deploy Agile. I think you can always deploy Agile. Again, my philosophy is it's the best thing since sliced bread, but the enthusiast speaking, but I think there's always an opportunity to deploy Agile in some way, and you will always get benefit, if nothing more than having teams talk about things openly, because the more people talk about ideas, the better the ideas get, honestly. So the challenge or the question will be, how much does your organization require in terms of upfront planning versus less planning and jump in and start and learn and adapt. So understanding that might be a give and take process where you have, here's what I plan to do, or here's the approach I plan to take, and here's the information I can give you. And it might be a back and forth testing the ground. For instance, here at UNC Greensboro, they were very traditional for very long. And then there's kind of one leader, the financial folks like to be very specific and intentional and detailed about estimating and dollars. The academic side's a little bit more free on the organic, a little more, has a stronger appetite for let's focus on what's most important and that's really and achieve that, not at a cost, not at a cost we can afford, but really, it's more important to be successful and serve our students. So there's been a balance here where we provided a whole lot of detail to move through something as an approval process, and then it was too much detail. But it initially, the leadership thought they wanted all that detail, and then they said, wait, we really don't want all that detail. And so let's come back around and what, we want detail, but we want maybe a different presentation of the detail, and we want the approval process, but we want maybe a lighter approval process. And those gateways and those understandings are going to depend both on where the organization is right now, where the leadership is, and then where, and then it still may be a give and take on, is this what on that comfort level of the transition. There's other institutions, other organizations that I've seen the CIO come in or a leader come in. The one library that I'm working with now is like, okay, we're going to do Agile, and we're going to do Scrum, and we're going to do Kanban, and here's how we're going to do it, and everybody's going to do it. The University of South Florida has a CIO there that was in the medical school, and they're over the whole system, University of South Florida system, IT organization, and are doing Scrum and Agile for everything. Everybody in that whole department, from from systems all the way up to analysts, and everybody in between, is doing Agile. Daily stand-ups, the whole gamut, just because they said, here, we're going to do this. So it'll vary based on, and so somebody that's that ingrained in Agile is going to require less pre-planning, less of the changeable traditional information. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, well, and higher ed is very, each university has its own personality, as does each department in each college. So those, understanding and learning what to present is part of it, but you will always be able to do Agile. The two approaches I think that I've seen are the most common to understand and adapt are either having a project-based team or a product-based team. The project-based team is creating an Agile team for a temporary time, like a project's a temporary set of time, right? So for a temporary time to be dedicated to the project to work in an Agile way. In this model, and honestly, I've done both of these models here at UNC Greensboro too, because of the threshold and the adaptability of change. So in this model, I would recommend or you can do, and I think this is how some other folks have deployed it too, and complete a project charter that's like a traditional project charter. So it gives management that, and it gives everybody on the same page, and it gets buy-in across different departments that need to be involved, or our stakeholders. It outlines the methodology, but it kind of frames your scope to some extent as far as objectives go, but it doesn't frame your scope to the detail that traditional planning would do. But it at least sets some expectations. So that can at least get the team secured, and then this is for if it's a larger effort, then, and by large I mean probably more than a couple of weeks, that you would do. Oops, that should be sprint zero. Sprint zero, initial planning stage that kind of works. The team figures out like, okay, how are we going to do? Here's our objectives. How are we going to do that? So you have a level of initial planning, and then you can also bring in related projects. I just kicked off a team here this week, and we're going to tackle 3 different initiatives that are related to one another. So they're technically 3 different project charters and 3 different project teams, so to speak, over time. But we're going to put them in one Agile team working as one backlog. So I've got some pictures of some of what we put together this week later in the slides too. So there's and then you can do themes within those related projects are essentially Agile themes. This gives you the opportunity to identify, define, and communicate the cost and some level of estimate and some level of risk and those sort of things that if you have management, executive management that wants to see that helps them to see and understand it. And like I said, this model works better when you have when you have a lot of people that are used to seeing this information in this way. So it gives them a little bit more, it eases the anxiety of the unknown by kind of setting the stage of here's what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and what we think it'll be. The other implementation or way you can get started is a product-based team. And this, you would do a level of initial planning to identify and organize an initial product backlog, the product being some line or some area. And we did this here for a little while where we had student, HR, HR payroll kind of aligned with each of the business areas. Alumni advancement had a team, whichever kind of the stream of work effort we were doing, and then a backlog for that. That you can possibly use some level of traditional estimating if you don't have a team secured yet, or if you have multiple product-based teams. Meaning, for instance, in the South Carolina work when I did it, it was a large-scale implementation. There were no resources. A lot of them were going to be brought in from other departments or secured as contractors. And so we did an estimate to figure out how many people and how many teams and where was the workload and what was the talent we needed, and did the 18-month estimate based on traditional estimating because there wasn't a team to do the estimating. So and that built the backlog as a starting point, but big chunks of epics in the backlog. Then you use a backlog grooming to make decisions about what to do and when to do it and how to do it for that product team. You would do then release planning, so you replan intermittently, but you would put everything, if you have a product-based team, the idea would put everything on there that relates to that product on the backlog so that it's all being prioritized together. And really, because you want to remember to keep working on what's most important. This is, and then you can also do this, like allocate the team, and this is what the one library that I'm working with now, they're going to do this where it comes in, it sort of comes in as a project with a charter, and it's even a blend of these two, but they allocate this time and materials time to a specific product owner for that period of time, and then the features get worked through during that period of time. And then it shifts to a different product owner for the backlog items. So the goal really, and this can work if you've got those large projects or you've got a lot of resources, if you've got more than 5 people that you're trying to do, if you're trying to roll out a big whole department or across whole university, and you can say this team can do this and this team can do that and this team can do that, then it can work. It can work very well. So,
hi, Kristine. I wanted to ask you, I think I'm pretty sure later you will be talking about going more into the workflow and describing the backlog. One of our attendees has asked about what the backlog is and how you define that.
Okay, I think we'll get to that.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, good. Okay, so next, the Agile principles real quick. So I want to make sure we keep moving along. The Agile Manifesto is the root of all Agile, and this is what the PMI is based there on the ACE, the Agile certification. Most of the certification is based on the Agile Manifesto overall. Again, it's the philosophy of it. This is really, really important. This was the background to this. It was formed in 2001 when anybody that was doing software different than a traditional waterfall had written a book. They all got together in Utah and said, what are we doing that's the same? And they came up with these things. And the folks that invented Scrum were at that, Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, as were a lot of other Agile thought leaders that now that the internet's so easy and accessible, a lot of them are, you can follow any of them on Twitter and learn a lot from them. So if you check out the names on there and find them on Twitter, it's really interesting to see. So individual interactions are more important than processes and tools. So processes and tools are important, but you've got to have that conversation and talk about things and work through things. And so they say, that conversation is a whole lot more valuable than having some tool or process to do something. The working software, and you can call that working product or working something, is better than documentation. So if I spend 3 months and all I've got is a requirements document or something, I've accomplished nothing and I've run out of money. It's really those iterations, like having something working is in piece by piece is more important than documenting something before I even work on it. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This is really the trust piece, working together. So it's really more important for us to accomplish something together than it is for he said, she said. This is what you said this 2 weeks ago. So too bad I'm giving you it. So it's really focusing on working together and again the trust and teamwork theme there, and responding to change over following a plan. So we have a plan. It's a lighter plan. It happens frequently. We plan a lot, but we trust the plan, but we don't trust the plan entirely, because the plan is just that. It's just a map, and so it's really making sure that we're focused on what's most valuable all the time. So this is really fundamental, and this is like the starting point. In 2007, when I first learned about this, I printed this out and posted it on the wall beside me, and looked at it every day and was like, this is great. This is what's important. And there's 12 specific items behind the manifesto, but really you can see that I try to pull out the theme here. It's really customer oriented. Whatever we're building for, whatever we're doing, and deliver early, continuous, get something working, welcome change. Don't just allow change, but welcome change. Deliver frequently. We got to work together. Motivated individuals are going to do a whole lot. The teams are self-organizing. They're empowered. Trust them to work. Trust them to get it done. Get people inspired to work, and support them and let them work. It's really about empowering the team to work together. Face-to-face conversation, and having a sustainable model. It's not like a kill yourself for a deadline model. It's really working, cadence and working through what's reasonable. Like, management doesn't tell you you must do all these things. The team says we can accomplish this, and then they commit and accomplish it as a negotiation. Excellence at self-organizing. And the last point is really important: reflect and improve. So that part is really, really important. It's always getting better, always improving, working together. All right, so I'm going to jump into Scrum specifically. So Scrum really is the most popular Agile model. Kanban's gaining some momentum, but it's a lot better for certain things. But Scrum is the most easiest, the simplest to adapt. So it's grown in popularity for that reason more than anything. So it really literally is based off of rugby and Scrum. So I have a picture of a Scrum here, but there was an article, there was a paper written in the Harvard Business Review in 1986 by analyzing companies and high-performing companies, and they document that NASA was sequential, and at the time, in '86, Fuji and Honda were more overlapping in their development cycles, and they were able to deliver more. Overall, they found in the companies that were higher performing, like Honda, there was built-in instability, self-organizing, overlapping, as I said, multi-learning, and there was like subtle control within the team. So those aspects, in the Harvard Business Review, they actually say the teams in those companies worked like a rugby scrum would work. And so that's where Scrum got its name from. So if you learn nothing else today, you got that to take away. Scrum is actually based on rugby. So this is the Scrum overview. The product owner has all the inputs. So there's one product owner to one product backlog, and that's your decision maker. That's who's accountable for the success of the team. That role is really, really, really important. But the product owner sets the priorities in a negotiation with the team so they understand, but they're really responsible to say, here's what's most important, and here's the vision of what that is. That backlog, the product backlog, is the overall set of stories or use cases, user stories of things to accomplish, features, whatever you're trying to do, the breakdown of everything that you want to accomplish, whether it's within a project or product or whatever however you want to frame it, that's the list, the backlog of everything you want to do. This is where you got to think a little bit different than the traditional project. The team then selects from that. You have a sprint backlog, you break out tasks, and you sprint in a 1 to 4 week sprint, daily stand-ups through that. You've got a scrum master that's keeping you on the process. You have a sprint review at the end and a sprint retrospective at the end, and you have that finished work. So it's really a cadence that you're going through. So I'm going to go through that in a little bit more detail, and then we'll come back to this picture again. So basically, there's a rule of threes in Scrum to keep your, kind of organize your mind. You've got roles, artifacts, and events. Some people call them meetings, some people call them events, some people call them ceremonies. The naysayer will say, I spend way too much time in meetings. The glass half full person will say that that's the advantage, that the time you spend working, like planning together, is actually useful time in understanding what you want to do. Building the right things is really important. Building things right and building the right things are really fundamental in Agile and in Scrum. So you do spend more time planning than you're not constantly coding or constantly building something. So going through each of those, in the Scrum roles are Scrum Master, Product Owner, and Team. The Scrum Master is responsible, and that's it. Those are the roles in Scrum. The Scrum Master is the sheepdog who is responsible for protecting the team, so to speak. Their job is to keep the team focused on the process and focused on the goals that they set within that sprint, and making sure that impediments are removed. So there's nothing stopping the team from reaching their goal. That's the primary job of the Scrum Master. The product owner is a visionary, has a backlog. And then the team is either your project or product team, is cross-functional folks that can do everybody in the perfect Scrum world, everybody can do everything. So those other, you've got managers, stakeholders, all those other people around. They're not part of the team. So the people, the Scrum Master, Product Owner, and the team are really the core Scrum folks.
Kristine, I'm wondering about the team, going back to the team, because in predictive, you decide on who your team members are based on their ability to do certain tasks, but it's quite different in Agile and in Scrum. And could you talk about that a little bit more in terms of how you would go about deciding who you want on that team, especially if you're thinking about something like a library or an academic setting, because I also know their time becomes quite devoted to that project. If you could just talk about that a little bit more. If I was building a team, how would I go about doing that for a project in Scrum?
So it's a tricky, there's no one answer. It's a tricky navigation. And so the more agile or Scrum-like you're going to be, the more you dedicate a team, and that's where, you know, if you have the resources or have the time, the more dedicated the team is, the more productive, the more energy, the more agile feeling they're going to get from it, and the more the more productive focus they'll be able to do. But it really, like I said, in higher ed, in any kind of, in the way we're organized, it depends on how you want to fit it together. So you have to really take a step back from your hierarchy of staffing model, right? So like your Scrum Master, product owner may not be, and are really advised not to be managers, functional managers. So the role of functional manager in the true Scrum world, the role of functional manager completely changes, because you've got these empowered, dedicated teams that are working with the product owner perspective, not a functional manager perspective.
Right.
In that sliding scale of hybridness, and depending on, you know, how much you can commit to that, you have any level of variance of that. So you can, the goal would be to dedicate the whole team 100% and have all the skills you got. That's the far end. The middle goal is, if you can't dedicate everybody all the time, can you dedicate everybody for a portion of the time so they can be together at a given time? So, you know, if it's not feasible, do we say, we'll have these 5 people dedicated 6 hours a day, and then the other 2 hours they're doing all the other things they need to do. But every day from, you know, 8 to 2 they do sprinting work, or you say, you know, I've got special skills and I need them on both these 2 teams, and I split somebody apart across those teams. I find that to be less ideal, because that person becomes schizophrenic. They're trying to keep up with 2 different teams and they're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. So their quality of their quality of life is a little strained and difficult. Sometimes it happens, sometimes we have to do that, but that's less than ideal, because they don't feel a part of either team, and the teams that feel a little disjointed because they only have a half-time person. So if you're able to, and again, the idea is, in the full Scrum methodology, to go full Scrum, you would put everything on that backlog, and then you would pull everything from the backlog, and you dedicate the people in that theme of backlog that are working towards it to accomplish it. And everything can be like, schedule, you know, a room for this meeting. You know, the backlog can be broken out into even things like that. Just anything and everything that has to get done can be managed through the task board, through the Scrum board. But it takes a different way of thinking and organizing.
Interesting. Would you recommend that you go outside to find someone else if there was one person that you thought you might split, or would that end up changing the priorities of the projects you're doing? How would you do that?
Well, so instead of splitting somebody, I like more of the model of a service model. If you've got multiple teams sprinting and they're dependent on one another, or they're dependent on somebody that's outside of a sprinting team, to have it more as a service provider, where, you know, I know as you plan out, we're gonna need these activities from this group, or these tasks completed from this group at this time, and you can do that through release planning, or through joint planning, or through even in sprint planning, in your iteration planning, to then request the services of the time and the work that you'll be needing.
Interesting. So, thank you.
Yeah. That way you're not, your team can still get its own rhythm and then intersect with everybody else as it needs to. But you've got to coordinate those services. So I've done, you know, four teams at one time planning together, because they're dependent on one another. It can get a little noisy and chaotic. or it can be fun and it comes together well. I've seen it go both ways. So it takes some champions, and you know, I've seen the split. I've seen a little bit of everything, and it's really finding the comfort level for your organization and what works best with each of the who's ready and who's not ready to kind of adjust.
Right. Thank you.
So the artifacts, the 3 specific artifacts we talked a lot about already, but the product backlog is always prioritize order, always reprioritizing, always shifting around, always changing as needed as we learn more, but always number one in the backlog. There's always a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, never more than 1, 1. There's never question. And the higher across the board, across the institution, whatever, the higher level you can get everybody working to number 1, number 2, the more value you're able to give the university or the institution. So always prioritized, always ordered. Sprint backlog is the work that you're going to take for your iteration, and it also is going to be prioritized. So you're always working top down, most important first. And the sprint backlog pulls from the product backlog and is what you're going to execute and complete during the iteration that you have, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Mostly the time you're going 2 or 3 weeks. 4 weeks is too long, and 1 week is too short, mostly. If you're doing web, like just web development, you could get away with a 1 week sprint cycle, but most of the time you're going to go with 2 weeks or 3 weeks. 2 weeks is my preference. 3 weeks you lose a little bit of momentum, but you also have a little bit more time to dig in. So
on this slide, I'm wondering with the product backlog, let's say you had a grant, then you would have a document that you'd written up, and then you would take that and you would break that down into how would you go from that grant you'd written up to creating your backlog?
I'm not sure what the way I would start it is to look for what are my deliverables and what am I committed to, and focus on identifying that and then build backwards from that. So what do I have to do, and then understand that, okay, and then what do I need to do that or accomplish that. So if it was like a set of deadlines or a set of deliverables or a set of objectives, then theme out the backlog from there and build them like, okay, well, what does that mean? And kind of build out from there each of the areas or each of the focus areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Thanks.
Sure. And you'll always have more details for things that are closer to being, like closer to execution, things that 3 to 6 months from now, you say, I'm not starting that, I don't need to be talking about it. You want to be talking about what's most important all the time. And the third artifact is the burn down chart. And that is tracking your progress through the iteration or through the release, to understand, am I on target? You're supposed to, and this, I'm going to speak to story points, but I think it'll be very overwhelming. Most people, when they first learn Scrum, story points are hard to comprehend because Scrum is like drinking from a fire hose. But remember, and one day come back to you burn down story points. So you're really burning down the velocity. And the burn down is based on the fellow that created Scrum, Jeff Sutherland, was a pilot, and it's about landing a plane and the burn down to that. So that's the connection there. The 3 events then, we have sprint planning, daily stand-up, and sprint review. The planning is a 2-part where you set your goals the vision from the product owner, what do I want to accomplish? And then the second part is, what are the tasks that are going to get me to accomplish that goal? You have a defined agreement on what is done. And then there's a daily stand-up, a 15-minute, what did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what are my impediments? What's stopping me from accomplishing the goals? And it's, we as a team are working together to accomplish our goals. Sprint review is also a two-part. One part is the review, like a physical, actual, here's what we completed. It's a show and tell. It's not a PowerPoint, it's not a status report. It's an actual, like, watch this, I developed this code and watch it run. Or I created this report, take a look at it. Or I implemented this policy, here's the, or I drafted the policy. You can't, it would take a lot of sprints to implement a policy. But we do have on our backlog to draft a policy on the current backlog. So anything like that, like what did you actually do, and then share it with the product owner for feedback. So you're gathering feedback. Is this what you had in mind? Did I meet your vision? And then adapting the backlog to with the feedback and reprioritizing. And then also doing a retrospective with the team to say, what did we do well and what can we improve on? And taking one of those improvements into the next iteration. So that's how you're constantly improving. So all that together, now you've got all that knowledge coming back at the diagram. You can see the product owner has the inputs coming in. So everybody's giving feedback to product owner. Product owner sorts everything out on the backlog. And then the team selects what they can based on the priority that the product owner and the vision product owner has. And team sets out and does the task breakout. We sprint. We meet every day. We talk about, we got our burn down there. And we remove impediments. We finish our work. We've got, I think the Scrum terminology is potentially shippable product. But whatever the definition, I find that whatever the definition of done that we agreed to is meant. And then we look at what we did, and we look back on what we did and improve. So I'm going to pause there.
I'm curious about where the feedback goes when you do something and you've learned something and you want to bring that learning back. Do you bring it back to the sprint backlog, the sprint planning meeting, the product backlog, the owner? Where does the learning go?
Within the team.
Within the team.
Yeah, you're trying to get better as a team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really looking retrospectively at yourselves, like what did we do well, and how can we do better? How can we work together better as a team? What did we do well? Well, we planned this well, but we didn't plan that well, or we totally knew that was coming and we forgot to plan for it, and so it ended up being unplanned work that sidetracked us, or anything and everything you do. There was one group I worked with, I think it was Abilene Christian a few years ago. Their first sprint was, their first burn down was just a straight line across. Like they were like, didn't accomplish anything that they had set out to, because they totally, like, they tried it and then they worked and they're like, that didn't go how we thought at all. So it's looking at that, looking at it and saying, did we do well? Did we not do well? And how do we do better?
Right, and the product owner is on the team.
Well, the recommendations, the product owner is part of the team. The recommendation, most of the time, is that the product owner is not part of the conversation of improvement, so that the team feels open, that they can talk openly. I find that it depends on who your product owner is and how do they want to hear that detail or not? Because sometimes it's like a vice president's the product owner. They probably don't want to get into the weeds of, the definition of a user story or a test criteria. Or why, but they may, it also could be a product owner that's very engaged and very knowledgeable and could provide constructive feedback. So it really depends, but the goal would be that you want the team to feel safe to talk openly, and nobody's feeling like they're being judged at all from an employment standpoint. So they need to be openly just be able to not criticize, but it has to be a safe room and no feelings. Nobody's hurting anybody's feelings, or nobody's holding back anything.
Right.
Okay. So the backlog is user story format, and that's really, there's epics. There's a lot of terminology all around Agile. As you dig into it, it can be overwhelming to hear this, hear it all at one time. But basically, epic's big and story's smaller, and it gets broken up. But the goal for the story, and Mike Cohn is the best, writes a lot about user stories. But the format is to give you a reason for what you're doing. As a role, some role, so as a, whatever role you're writing the story for, I want to do something so that there is benefit. So as a, and this is describing the work. So as a, and I'll give an example that I had from yesterday, but like as a scheduler, I want to understand I want to understand the errors I need to fix so that I may easily fix them through in an efficient manner. So we're working on an error report, or working on getting people information about something they need to do, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to provide the information to them that works for them and getting their perspective. So thinking about it, like, why do they want to do that, rather than thinking about why do I want them to do that, or why do it's changing the way of thinking, changing your thought into the user's perspective. What do they want from this? What are they trying to accomplish from this? And that's really that's the difference in the user story format. Rather than saying the system should generate a report, it's really looking at it like, why am I generating the report? Who's looking at it? Why are they looking at it? So that's the idea and the thought behind the user's perspective. There's a couple of philosophies around that. The 3 C's is that you want to have a conversation about it. It has to be small enough to fit on a card, like an index card or a sticky note, and you have to be able to confirm it or test it. So that's the conversation card and confirmation. And then another acronym out there is the invest in your stories, and that means that they're independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, sized appropriately, and testable. So both of those you can find, but those give you kind of an idea, like the stories are kind of give and take features of things in Agile.
Mm-hmm.
I'll kind of move through this. This is kind of the estimating, the true estimating, and it's really Agile is like a time and materials kind of contract. So I've done Agile, like business Agile contracts that have been, we'll do some level of work. And it's really a time, it'll be this many weeks of this person's expertise, and we'll do some prioritized list within this scope of work. So it becomes a more flexible contract. And the CIO I was working with at the time was very flexible and trusted. He was all for that, and it worked great. And then we sat together and kind of sized out everything and prioritized everything and sorted through it. And we worked on and delivered the things that were important to them and to the areas that we worked with. So it can be done, but it does require, you're really focused more on the time and materials piece of it and less on the exactly what the scope is. So in that, they use planning poker, story points, and velocity. Planning poker is the Delphi method, which is an independent experts providing their estimates, and it's relative. The story points are relative sizing. So one thing relating to how is this sized to this? It's twice as big, 3 times as big, whatever. And velocity is the cadence or the rhythm that you get as a team. So instead of, you can track hours and you can track hours at the task level, but instead of focusing so much on that, in true Agile and Scrum, it's a little bit more fluid based on, and you really want the team to talk more about it and get good at working together than you do on them giving you an estimate and meeting the date. So that's the mindset shift. And that's where you got to really understand if your organization, where your culture and your climate, your appetite is between the two. Planning poker is the story, how you set your story points. This is, you basically have an A-based story, and then you all, the whole planning poker concept is based loosely on the Fibonacci series, and you use that as your, it's twice as hard, or 3 times, or 5 times as complex, or 8 at times. It's got infinity, it's got a coffee cup, it's got a question mark, and everybody votes and gives their opinion. So you talk through something, everybody votes. The low person and the high person both tell why they think it's low, why did they think it's less complex or more complex than most of people, and then you listen to them, you vote one more time. Some people will say vote over and over again. I think twice is enough. And then you record the size. We just did this the other day, and we said, do we want to do mean, median, or mode? And we said, well, median is probably not, or mean is probably not going to work because we don't want decimals. So we decided that we would go with median rather than mode. So we have some numbers that don't fall in here. But the team just has to agree on how you're doing it and be consistent. And it can be fun. And you can actually buy packs of planning poker cards. And basically, this is the velocity is your rate of your team's completion of stories. So how many story points did you complete? So this example, the team planned out 21 points, and they only completed completed 18 points. So their velocity is 18. And so then the next time the next sprint they go into, they'll plan for 18 story points instead of 21, unless there was some huge unplanned task or something. So this and here you can see like the story 1 is more complex. Story 4 is the most complex on the list. You know, that gives you an idea. But story 1 would be the first thing that you want to try and get done. And again, you can associate hours with the tasks. So I'll show you some pictures, and then I think we're good. I think we're still good on time. This is a Scrum board example. So on the left side, there are stories, and all the little stickies are tasks. You start out with, here's a task breakout. They checked out is in the middle, and then the done on the right side. The burn down is on the upper corner. It's got unplanned task and impediments. So your basic sprint board has this layout. Here's you can see the burn down is they're off track on here, and they're kind of getting by the second week. You can see the first one, they've moved over more to done. Second one, moved to done, and you can see their burn downs come down. So the goal would be, if I'm going to finish something, I want to finish something. I don't want to finish a little bit of everything, and I want to finish what's at the top of that list. So that story that's at the top, everybody should be trying to get done. and the second story, everybody should be trying to get done, and work in that way so that we don't get a little bit of everything done, but nothing really done, and we just kind of amble along. So it's very goal-oriented. Here's another example of a Scrum board. These folks named themselves the Scrum Dogs, and they all had avatars. I don't think you can see. I don't know if you can see the avatars. This is another one. They called themselves Team Dojo, and mapped out same kind of idea. Here is a Google Doc. So we did a lot with virtual teams and use Google Sheets and Google Sheets to do this, and had like a built-in burn down. This is all by hour. This isn't by story. So, but it was with a bunch of people that were tracking hours that were contractors. So it was fine to be tracking their hours. They didn't mind. They were used to it. A lot of people in higher ed, you know, there's mixed opinions about hour tracking, or mixed impressions that people get. So, you know, whatever works. But you can see then the ideal and the actual here. Couple of different sprints. This is an example of release planning. So this is some of the work that I did this week with some folks that we put together a new team for a new initiative this week. And we've got 3 different charters, like I said, 4 project charters. The one charter that's the most important has, I think we identified 5 or 6 themes within it, and then we had a couple other themes and one of them we still are going to need to break out more. But this, each of the colors represented a different theme of work to be worked on. So it's like blue is a report, yellow is data related, turquoise on the far left. The turquoise color there is some sort of either data definition or procedure to be defined for the business. The orange is something that, you know, reviewing already done work. And so we kind of put all these stickies up on the board and sort and organize them, and found duplicates and found missing pieces, and we keep, you know, we kind of group and add and work through it. This is, and the dots on there mean something too. So like the 3 dots to us, and we defined all this, you can do it however you need to, but the three smaller dots mean it's critical, very important. The red dot, I think, meant that we need to get, that has to be accomplished sooner, like by a certain release time. And the blue dot means it relates to one of the other projects. So we've got a whole key on a board too. These are things that we need to do, but we don't need to do right now. So they're in a later release. So we don't need to talk about them. We don't need to know their detail right now. We just need them. We need to remember they're there. And then these are the other 2 projects in the backlogs for those. And so then this was the sprint plan pulled together. And here you can see our key on the left there. We've got each of the themes, and then the stories. The bigger one's the story, and the smaller ones are the tasks. So that's that's an actual sprint planning that we're sprinting right now. We're also using the RIKE tool. So WRIKE it's a leading agile project management tool. We have ServiceNow, and we're working to deploy agile portfolio management with ServiceNow, and there's an agile option with that. Microsoft Project also has an agile agile feature to it now. So just about any tool, and we use Google Sheets here for a while too, but just about any tool. I think you've talked some about Trello, but they're all, you know, there's an agile, almost every tool at this point has an agile piece to it. RIKE is one of the leaders in project management. It's pretty useful, and you can configure the boards to be, you know, the headers and the workflow and everything however you want it to be, drag and drop, move things along, group things, tag things. So we're using that and defining that within the sprints and the backlog, and it works really, really well. But it's a compliment to our board. We all believe and like having the visual. And I'll say, if there's any Dave Ramsey followers out there, Dave Ramsey is a finance talk show person who's all about no debt, living with no debt. And he'll say, if you've heard him speak it all on the radio, he'll say that if you pay off your mortgage, he believes pay off your debt, save some money, pay off everything, and then pay off your house. And he always says, it feels different to walk in your backyard on your grass in your bare feet with a paid off mortgage when it's your own house. And that's the difference with the stickies. It feels different to actually physically move a sticky to complete than it does to just click and drag something in Excel or in a sheet or in a tool. The physical movement of the sticky makes a difference. It gives you a greater sense of accomplishment. So there's some examples with that.